Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the 21st edition of the Annual Investment Meeting webinar series. My name is Kritika Shetty, and I'll be your MC for today. The Annual Investment Meeting is the largest investment platform in the world, an initiative by the UAE Ministry of Economy. AIM has been promoting a healthier global economy by linking investment opportunities to fastest growing economies under 6 key pillars: foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, small and medium enterprise, startups, and future cities, with a special event, One Belt, One Road. We would like to thank our multilateral partner, Islamic Cooperation, for the development of the private sector for sponsoring today's webinar. We would also like to thank AIM Startup Sustainable Partner C Institute. They are the research and development arm of Diamond Developers, which promotes low carbon living and accelerates climate action through professional training, public education, events, and special projects. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you experience any issue with your audio or video during the webinar, just refresh your browser and that should take care of everything. We would suggest using Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Microsoft Edge. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question tab in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you like any specific questions, vote it under the questions tab so we can address it to our speakers. During the webinar, we'll be running live polls located beside the question tab. We request you to participate by casting your votes. So today's topic is economic fallout of COVID-19 on female founders and accelerating technologies during the time of crisis. In the webinar today, we have a fireside chat between two power horses, Ms. Shalu Garg, who is the Managing Director of Microsoft for Startups, and Ms. Tsai, who is the CEO and founding partner of 500 Startups, discussing about impact of COVID-19 on female founders, followed by a panel discussion with our panelist, Saika Bennett, CEO and co-founder of MediScreen, Dr. Aisha Khanna, co-founder and CEO of Edo AI, and Mr. Fadi Hindi, founder and CEO of Algofy AI and senior partner of Zshays Digit AI. Ms. Shalu, may I request you to please join us on stage, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shalu from dialing in from San Francisco. A big hello to you all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Before we get into the conversation here, I especially wanted to thank the UAE Ministry of Economy and Annual Investment Meeting for picking up this topic that is so super relevant in today's time. It's been relevant for many years, but especially given the times that we are in with regards to COVID, it's become even more super crucial. I especially wanted to call out two folks who have been working with, Zohaib and Lulu, who have worked around the clock from Annual Investment Meeting, putting this together, and the entire team together. So before I get Christine Tsai on the stage, let's set some context around what we are doing here. If you think about the female founder, the ecosystem there, every time, I mean, for the longest time, the conversations have been around access to capital, and there's a pipeline issue, and there just aren't enough female founders there or the businesses there. And today's conversation is actually challenging that entire narrative, right? Which is, what is the impact, economic impact of the COVID situation that's pertinent or prevalent almost in every part of the world on female founders? It's a topic that's super near and dear to my heart and has been for the longest time. And I want to call on stage here with me Christine, who shares the same sentiment as I do. Christine Tsai is the founder and general partner at 500 Startups. Christine, a big, warm, and a huge welcome to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Shalu. It's so great to be here. And hello, everyone tuning in.
Yeah. So, Christine, let's get to it. I know we only have 30 minutes with you, so I want to make sure we get the best that you have to offer here. You know, oftentimes when there are topics around diversity and inclusion, there are different shades of interpretation there, right? Sometimes it's all about bringing diverse perspectives to the table. Oftentimes, D&I is just focused on females. But in my view, D&I ultimately comes down to the values of an individual, right? What is the lens through which you view D&I? And I know you have been a huge champion of D&I for the longest time. What, in your view, how do you define D&I, and how do you attribute your values to this such an important topic?
Well, it's a great question, just in terms of like what D&I means, and like how I see it for 500. I mean, I know personally, when I think about inclusion or unity inclusion or diversity and inclusion, it's really a fundamental belief that, really that talent exists it exists really in all corners of the world, all, genders, nationalities, languages, backgrounds. It's really present everywhere. There's really no logical reason that, certain genders or certain races, ethnic groups have more talent than others. I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, when you see it around the world. Yet the huge gap exists in opportunity. And, as we've seen time and time again, there are a lot of reasons why that inequity exists. So it really starts from that belief that because that talent exists everywhere, that if you want to not just access that talent, but, thinking about it from a business perspective, if you want to actually benefit from that, you have to really, put that kind of at the core of what you do. And that's what 500 has done since really the beginning. Like we always went into investing in companies from day one, thinking that there's great talent, sure, of course, in Silicon Valley, but there's great talent outside of Silicon Valley, actually outside of the country. And that was a very contrarian view back then. I think, Shali, you've been in the Valley long enough to know that in 2010, it was still very Silicon Valley centric. So the thought of investing outside of the Valley was questionable. So when we were investing in Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia, a lot of question marks on the quality of that deal flow. And when you extended that to even types of founders, it definitely was very different from a lot of firms in terms of really not just investing in female founders or underrepresented founders, but actually kind of really being much more explicit that we love to invest in female founders. We love to invest in businesses targeting underserved demographics. So I think, putting that together, we always did that because we felt like not just that it's the right thing to do, but we will be much more returns and performance.
Yeah. So, and thank you for that. And I completely agree with you. I think it's the perspective that you hold, right? And different folks can have different perspectives. But at the end of the day, it is about bringing variety to the table. So I want to quickly tap into what you just said, which is around Silicon Valley, right? Oftentimes, again, last week, the Startup Genome Report came out. Again, Silicon Valley continues to dominate the innovation ecosystem across the world, right? And for years, it's dominated like super strongly. When we look at the investment trends in the Valley versus the rest of the world, right? What is your perspective, especially given the times that we are in? Do you think are we putting in a lot, or have we slowed down? And how is the market across the world?
I think in terms of venture, maybe specifically, clearly there's still even despite these times of COVID and a global pandemic, there's still activity, of course, and we sit more at the early stage of venture. There's still people writing checks and companies getting funded, but albeit it's likely probably not at the pace it was pre-COVID and even a couple of years ago. So in terms of what that means globally, I think it definitely depends, because I've certainly seen in many markets, probably at the onset of COVID, when March, when things were really starting to accelerate, this was new. A lot of investors held back, and their first priority was their own portfolios, triaging their portfolios, hold off on new conversations. And I definitely see this with founders in our portfolio who were in fundraising conversations at that time. Many people pulled out. Some of them, thankfully, were able to pull rounds together, but either it was not at the same target or the terms were retraded. So definitely a lot of that was happening. But now that COVID is clearly not going away, and things are just fundamentally changing about life, industries, everything, and we're seeing such a huge transformation happening, and that this will persist probably for through next year. I think a lot of, certainly investors, but also when you think about regions and countries around the world, they are seeing that maybe certain industries are hit very hard. Technology continues to be, entrepreneurship and technology continues to be kind of where they see the future headed. So if anything, they may invest even more into entrepreneurship for the future development of their economies. And certainly on the investor side of things, as we've seen with, the past couple of recessions, some of the best companies were formed right during that recession or right after it. And so a lot of them will miss out if they don't continue to invest.
Yeah, and later in the panel, the awesome panelists that will be coming up, we will be talking about digital transformation, and that ties into what you just said, right? Because if you look at the large enterprises, how many dollars are they going to put in organic growth or R&D or acquisition, right? Ultimately, startups are the innovation hub, and I always say startups are faster, cheaper, agile, easy to pivot, which works amazingly well with large enterprises, right? And so startups aren't going anywhere, and that's really refreshing to hear that. 500 startups conducted this amazing survey, which I've suddenly become a big fan of. I talk about it. I've been talking about it in the last few weeks. Zohaib, if you can please keep the question ready just for polling, that would be awesome. So for those of you who are watching right now, we are doing live polling. So as I pose this question to Christine, I will ask you the same. Zohaib is going to ask you a similar question on chat as well. Please feel free to drop your poll, and then we'll compare, what's there. So Christine, your team conducted the 500 startup survey results, challenges for female founders during COVID-19. And I was blown away by some of the highlights I saw from this survey. Like, it's been a while. Access to capital continues to be number one, but there are some things in here that just completely took me by surprise. I will hold off my surprises for just a bit. But what's your perspective on the survey? Do you want to share with everyone, how your team went about this? I think it's a pretty bold move, what you guys did, and, presented the findings in the market, which are hard hitting, but they are the facts.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So, I mean, with COVID starting to accelerate, for 500, we thought quite a bit about, of course, how is this going to impact our portfolio, but how is this going to impact founders in general? And because we do invest in, all kinds of founders from, it's such a wide, diaspora of founders. We definitely thought about female founders in terms of, how is this going to impact them? Because, as we've seen, the numbers are very marginally improving, but, they're still low in terms of the number of female founders who get access to, get venture capital funding. It maybe increased from 2.2% in 2018 to about 2.8% today, which is a bit of movement, but it's still, very small numbers. And overall, it's still at roughly about 2 to 3% of all teams that get venture capital funding. So, and what we've seen in not just in tech and venture, but just broadly, there is definitely a lot of evidence that has emerged that the economic fallout of COVID is disproportionately affecting women, disproportionately affecting underrepresented minorities. And if anything, women already earn less, they save less. And so the capacity to absorb these shocks is likely going to be less. So we certainly thought about female founders who are looking to fundraise, get access to resources. And, our concern is that when investors start to pull back and invest in what's safe or not invest at all, a lot of the progress, that has been made over the last couple of years may be lost because of that. So, what we wanted to do was really get a survey from female founders, and this went out to not just the portfolio of ours, but kind of broadly female founders and understanding what they were seeing. And so, in terms of that, we wanted to really kind of renew our commitment. I mean, we've been investing in female founders for a long time, but we wanted to kind of bring attention to that through the survey and through the 500 Female Forces campaign that we launched. So, I mean, in terms of the results, a couple of the key learnings that we saw was that the majority of the founders that responded, so about 56%, said that they are fundraising, and about 2/3 of them say that they feel that COVID will disproportionately affect them, which means, of course, less funding. And this is during a time when according to the survey, nearly 70% of them say they only have 6 months of runway or less. So they don't have much time, and they don't have much, capital in the bank. About one third of them mentioned that running a company while having to take care of family members at home has been difficult or impossible to manage. And then finally, the top challenges female founders are facing include customer acquisition, which actually was the number one. So basically, getting users, increasing runway, which was about 34%. And then finally, at a pretty close third is 25% just maintaining a healthy work-life balance. So those were the top three.
And I want to dig deeper into access to customers, which you said was number one, right? I often say this, that there's so much noise around fundraising when it comes to female founders, or even like generic founders, right? That we often, like, even if you do manage to raise funds, let's say you raise funds, you do need customers to keep that bill going, lights on, right? And so often there's so much focus on funding that we tend to forget this big pot of cash that's sitting there in terms of access to customers. And I'm personally extremely passionate about this, which is commercializing revenue opportunities for startups into large enterprise customers. I've done that in my previous life. I continue to do that at Microsoft as well. What is your perspective on access to enterprise customers? Like, do you think it's the holy grail for startup success, or would you still put funding at number one? What's your perspective on that?
Oh, I mean, I think definitely if you don't have customers, then, then your business doesn't, you have nothing for your business, right? You need customers, and depending on if you're on the consumer side or B2B, of course, depending on whatever business model and sector you're in, who your customer is it varies, right? But fundamentally, if your desire to acquire customers and retain customers doesn't exceed the fundraising focus, then something's off. Now, of course, there are going to be periods in the life cycle of a company where you do have to fundraise. That's probably the bane of many founders' existence, to have to go out and fundraise. And some are great at it, some detest it. Most of them detest it, but so that's only going to be your business is not about fundraising, right? So your business is about building something great that customers love and they can't live without. And so certainly the focus really needs to be there on making sure that your customers are happy, and this is something that they will pay for. They'll pay money for, they'll share with others. That's definitely critical.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the poll results, which just came up. And Christine, believe it or not, this is a gamble. It was a blind gamble, and it came up. So the question that was posed to the audience was, besides access to capital, so I on purpose eliminated access to capital, what are some of the biggest roadblocks for female founders? 38%, which is the highest, said access to enterprise customers. So big thumbs up. The next is lack of mentors and network. I think that was highlighted in your report as well to a certain extent. That was 35%. 24% said technical skills. And I continue to hear this, especially in the emerging markets, that technical skills is something that female founders really crave for. Like, just giving them, for example, Microsoft Azure is not going to be enough, right? They need skills, they need training, they need someone who can teach them, what to do and how to do it. That came out 21%, which is not a surprise. And then 5% said work-life balance. Thank you for that. I think we oftentimes get very sucked into, again, customers and capital and skills, that we forget about work-life balance. So still 5% said that. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating in this. Let's continue. So, one of the things that came out of the survey that you did, or perhaps your broader objective, is this 500 female forces. I love that. It sounds like, these women on track, moving towards a goal. Tell us about this. What are you guys, what's your goal? What's your big ambition? And how do you plan to get there?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason that we had set it up was it was what I mentioned before, was to really bring visibility to female founders and the impact that COVID-19 would have on on that group of founders. And so what we did was, in addition to launching that survey, we set up a landing page, which is female, I believe it's femalefounders.500.co. And what we did was partner with a number of organizations to provide specifically female founders with resources during this time. And what we wanted to do was also kind of share our things that we were doing in terms of really providing an extra commitment or resources for female founders. So one was definitely the changes that we made around our flagship accelerator program. Of course, in light of COVID, travel restricted, everything is turning virtual. But us making the program not just virtual first, but also on a kind of a rolling admissions application schedule versus by cohort base, that actually really helps for certainly for founders who aren't in Silicon Valley, but definitely for female founders, underrepresented founders, because now they don't have to, they can still access and potentially be considered and get investment from 500 and go through our flagship accelerator program, which we have been investing in many companies through that for the past 10 years, but now not have to uproot everything and relocate to San Francisco for that. We found that for actually a number of founders, especially those who are parents who aren't from Silicon Valley, that oftentimes was a barrier. So that was one thing. And then we definitely did a lot in terms of, or we've been trying to do a lot in terms of just providing resources for female founders that are specifically around a lot of those things, like helping them scale and grow, connect with other investors globally. And that definitely has been, of course, fundraising help, access to resources per the poll that was just launched here. And definitely what we see is fundamentally that's the biggest thing. And it's like that for most founders, but especially for female founders who may not necessarily be in those networks all the time or have that access, it's definitely even more of a need.
Yeah. And if I heard you correctly, this is now available to any female founder across the globe, right? Or is it just the Valley?
It's actually for anyone who can access the internet. So definitely folks who are tuning in, they can go to the website and check things out. And I think for us, the other thing, in addition to announcing the campaign that we did a couple months ago, we actually just recently announced our initiatives around something that's called ESG, which is a framework that stands for environmental, social governance. And it's something that we feel actually fits in very nicely with what we've been already doing in terms of investing in emerging businesses, underserved markets, female founders. Definitely take a look at 500.co/ESG. But what we have found that a lot of the things that we've been seeing that aren't great in terms of tech companies that have gotten very big and not addressing some of these types of issues, those can very much be addressed early on. And we really want to work with early stage startups to address that, while they still can, before it becomes a huge cost to fix. Things like diversity and inclusion, environmental impact, social impact, governance impact. And this all very much relates to increasing female founders, female leadership, access to funding. I think all of those things are very intertwined.
Yeah. And, at Microsoft, that's one of the things we do. In fact, we recently launched a Microsoft Global Social Entrepreneurship Program. And internally, we are carrying a matrix of 50% of our portfolio is going to be female and underrepresented founders. And we've just put it on the board. Like, unless we put it, how are we going to chase that goal? Right? We keep talking about it. We got to do something. Well, guess what? Let's just put it on the board and let the entire team and whoever is involved watch that goal and chase that. Yeah, so I know we just have a few minutes here. Christine, I have one last question, and then I just want to browse through the chat to see if there are any questions for you. What's next in your big vision of diversity and inclusion? Like, where do you go from here in terms of, obviously, 500 female forces? What is your big dream for the female founder space?
Well, I know that, when I've thought a lot about what is the big vision for 500, big dream. And I know one thing that always that always is persistent in my head is that today, when you think about who's in positions of power, holds the purse strings, VC, big CEOs, or even just founders who gets funding, it's clearly a certain type of founder and certain gender, and but for me, I think someday it won't be odd to see a female CEO, or a minority female CEO, or a minority female CEO who is pregnant, and people will look at that and not bat an eye. Today, clearly, there's it's unusual to see, but in the future, the face of the entrepreneur, the face of a CEO will look very different. Like it frankly, and when I think about it, it's like, it's a blank slate. Like there's not this prototype or a certain type of characteristic. It could be anybody from any country, female, male, is a parent, is of a certain age, speaks certain languages. I feel like the opportunity to kind of make that possibility, like anybody and any kind of person, and so we don't have these disproportionate numbers of who gets funding and who doesn't. That would be a big dream, and that 500 would be a huge part in making that happen around the world. So when I think about that, that ideal to where we are today, a lot of the work that at least 500 is doing in terms of one of our core values, which is to really, try to be that example, is doing things like this Female Forces initiative, by implementing ESG into our firm policies and investment guidelines. Those things will have an impact for sure. And for us, this is our 10th year. Our portfolio is now more than 2,500 companies across 75 countries, and it sounds like big numbers, but we actually feel like that's only 75 countries. That's about less than, it's about 40% of the world, and it's only 2,500 companies. There's so many more out there that are yet to be formed, and they're going to be built. The next big companies will be built by people that that look very different from the typical founder. So we want to make sure that they have access to the resources they need. They have access to capital.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Christine, I have one question before we just wrap up here. What advice would you give to the upcoming founders, given the times we are in right now? Coming in the middle of COVID, coming out of COVID, the world is changing. What advice would you give to the upcoming founders?
I actually just I had an interview just last week. It's a little, I'll do a nod to one of our portfolio companies, but Apply Board, which actually just recently became one of our newest unicorn companies. He said something that actually struck with me, maybe because the alliteration, but the 3 Ps, which were persistence, passion, and planning. I think those 3 it's super prudent, and there's another P there, being prudent, but definitely in terms of advice, persistence is just really key in terms of, getting through this time, and, not even just in COVID, but just being a founder. You're constantly hearing no's, you're getting rejected. It's not easy. It's not like, it's not like most things. It's a very difficult path, and oftentimes a lonely path, but that persistence and continuing to believe that what you're building is going to be huge, even when you're getting no's from investors, people can't get, people can't recruit people to your company. That persistence is critical, and that passion, that belief that you're building something great. And then planning, right? That as you build this company, that you are pragmatic as well. You kind of balance that optimism with pragmatism.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, oftentimes when I'm meeting with female founders, a few of them, I mentor them as well. And, it's often like, hey, I'm not going to get funding, or, I'm going to run into issues or whatever. That's exactly what I say. Have a plan. And you may not stick to the plan, the circumstances may change, but have a goal that you can chase, right? You need to have a rock solid plan and be ready to pivot. It's okay if you have to pivot here and there, that's okay. But a plan is a must. You just cannot be on your own. Dean, you said you're leaving us with some pretty good nuggets. You said talent exists everywhere. Gap exists in opportunities. There are tons of opportunities for female founders. We just have to uncover it. Access to customers continues to remain the number 2 aspect that female founders chase after funding. You talked about internally a framework that you call ESG, that your 500 startups is building right now or has built. And then, of course, the awesome 500 female forces. I mean, hats off to you for being such a strong D&I evangelist and helping support so many female founders. I live in the Valley. I know the amazing work you do. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll see you around once this COVID goes. We'll go out and have a cup of coffee, okay? Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shalu. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care. Okay. So, hey, we have a panel. Do we have our rock star panelist up there? Great. So please keep the dial right there because this is like celebrity panel that's coming up. Let me introduce to you Sahika Bennett, CEO and co-founder MediScreen. Dr. Aisha Khanna, she is the co-founder and CEO of Addo AI. And Fadi Hindi is the founder and CEO of Algofo.ai and a senior partner of Digit AI. I mean, is this a celebrity panel? Are you guys ready? Totally. Look at that.
You're being too kind.
Not
You're being too nice.
So this is actually a panel from across the world. So San Francisco, Singapore. Fadi, you are in Dubai right now, one of my favorite places. And then Sahika, you are in Dubai as well, right? Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Before we get into sort of our topic of discussion, I just wanted to level set the conversation here, which is, as Christine and I were chatting, that, oftentimes it's not just about funding, right? When we talk about female founders or just founders in general, oftentimes access to capital is looked upon as, gosh, I got to chase that funding and build my company. But there are so many hurdles and so many opportunities that come in the path. And of course, we talked about access to customers as well. So what I want to do in the next 45 minutes or so is actually curate this conversation with you. We're just going to go, we're going to roll with the flow, right? And I'm going to tap into your experience building your own individual companies. So hats off to you there. It's my dream. Hopefully I'll get there one day. But I want to tap into the vulnerable aspect of each one of you, given the situation that we're in, and just, share with the audience the journey that you've been with. So I know I introduced you at a high level. What I would love to do is give you each a few minutes to introduce yourself, your background, and how you came about building this company. So Dr. Khanna, do you want to start first?
Yes, great. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I am co-founder and CEO of Addo AI. We are a company that specializes in building big data platforms and then building machine learning models on top of that to help companies leverage data as a strategic asset. So we're a consulting firm. We work with some of the largest telcos in Asia, some of the largest healthcare systems in the US, some of the largest banks in South Asia, and logistics companies as well. And for all of them, we organize their information and then think of business problems that can be solved more efficiently and effectively using artificial intelligence. I have a team of about 100 machine learning engineers and data scientists, and we really love what we do. We see our business growing. And more than anything else, we see this unused asset that more and more companies have and are beginning to appreciate and realize and want to turn into something that can optimize customer experience, automate incident management, reach a greater customer base, etc. So I'd be happy to talk about that over the coming hour.
Great, absolutely. Fadi, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and having me on board. And it's an honor and a privilege to be asked to join. So I'll answer your question about the vulnerability. Let's start with just real briefly. I come from a very technical background. I'm an American with a computer engineering degree with focus on robotics and AI back in the early 90s. So, and I've had 3 decades of experience as an executive. Half of it was spent in management consulting, and then the other half I've climbed through the ranks to become a CEO of a very large company here in the UAE. I just kind of had this, I don't know whether it was a moment of enlightenment or a moment of desperation, but I decided in August of last year to go out and start 2 businesses. One of them is a technology startup. I don't know. We'll see what time will tell. But from a vulnerability standpoint, I could tell you that it's definitely not an easy road to be a founder, especially with somebody that has been in the corporate world for such a long period of time. But I've always dreamed. So Shallow, this is for you. I've always dreamed of starting my own business.
Okay.
And now I've been at it for 10 months.
Yeah.
And I can tell you stories, man.
I take a page from the book. I'm already all set for that.
I can tell you some stories. So
yeah.
We are basically, in a nutshell, Algofy.ai comes from Algorithms Simplified. We're basically leveraging machine learning and AI. But really what we're going after is solving a very big problem that we have in the UAE and even in the Middle East, which is a savings product for customers that want to save on a systematic basis for financial goals, like kids' education, buying a house, or whatever the case might be. We're going to make it 100%. We're building an app. We're about to launch. So we're building an app that is 100% digital with one of the major insurers here in the UAE, and allows people to basically buy and see their performance on a daily basis for the funds that they're investing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Fadi. Sahika, you and I were at a meeting in San Francisco a year ago, right? For coffee. We couldn't make that happen. And then I see your name on the panel and I'm like, look at how this world is. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, it's great. It just demonstrates how small the world is really getting. I believe that technology is connecting us in new ways, and it's a real pleasure to meet you and this panel. So my name is Tsai. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Tsai, and we also launched MediScreen. Ultimately, we built a virtual one-way video platform which uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to really predict behavior in the workplace. So it was encouraging diversity and inclusion by allowing everybody to have a chance to be interviewed in exactly the same way based on competencies. We started our journey in 2018, and it was probably a little bit on the early side. But now I think everyone knows what we're talking about when we talk about virtual video. So very fortunate. The timing is great for us right now. In March, we pivoted and we added MediScreen, which is a virtual triage, which really helps doctors, governments, and employers really be able to evaluate people remotely for COVID-19 by asking a series of questions and recording it on video. And this really allows them to be assessed in order of risk. So making sure the right people get tested first. And as we know, the scale of COVID is huge, as is the technology really allows a faster action point, which is really preparing people. So ultimately, we focus on allowing people to live and work in new ways. I think we look at both lives and livelihoods, and health really is an area that we really knew we would go into eventually, but COVID really made us pivot and go into this area with MediScreen, and we had some extremely amazing conversations and results, and in talks with governments all over the world. So very grateful to be contributing in a small way.
Awesome. So I have a list of discussion topics here, but before we get into the topics, let me just throw out the vulnerability aspect. The last 3 to 4 months haven't been easy for any one of us, whether it's our personal life, professional life. There was a lot of moving around things, right? What I want to do is first tap into you as an individual, you as a founder. So your journey in the last 3 to 4 months, what are some of the changes you have seen in yourself as a CEO, as a founder of company. Patty, do you want to go first?
Sure. So you're talking about COVID specifically?
Yes.
All right. So the obvious thing, and you're saying the changes that we've seen ourselves, or has been external forces?
No, just within yourself as an individual, as a CEO founder, given something, you know, that we didn't see coming, hit us so hard. You all are entrepreneurs. How has it changed you?
Yeah, the first thing is, am I doing the right thing? Am I crazy? Should I just shut down and go do something else? Should I look for a job? This thing is not working, and it's a roller coaster of emotions, of highs and lows, because of the exponential increase in the number of no's that you're getting because of funding, and people that typically would have entertained, speaking to you are basically scrambling to make sure that they can keep their business afloat. So I think that the changes have been self-discovery, and really, believe it or not, I've actually, turned back to meditation as a way to calm down the kind of the runaway train in your mind. To be able to focus on the things that really matter. And I loved what Christine was saying earlier, that those the persistence, the positivity, the three things that I should have written them down. The persistence. What was it? What were the three? It said persistence, positivity, and planning. Yeah. And I think planning was really something that also resonated. Is that the changes, that the way that you change as a person. And you have to make sure that you stay the course and go back and look at the fundamentals of why you started to be able to keep you on track.
Yep. Thank you. Sneha, what about you? What are some of the changes you've seen in yourself?
I learned a lot about myself, normally because I traveled so much the last year, especially, and I think I sacrificed a lot of time with my children. I've got 2 young children, both under 7, and I literally was on a plane every week. And what it really showed me was how much I probably missed out on while I've been on my mission, just to be around them. And how nice it was to actually combine both leading a company and still being a hands-on mom and being around and watching some of the magical things that the kids do. At the same time, it also made me appreciate how hard it must be for women in leadership roles to be juggling their duties if they work for a corporate, because as a startup, I can be more flexible with my teams who are mothers or fathers. But sadly, in the corporate world before COVID, I think when we talked about getting more women into leadership roles and female CEOs, and they needed more flexibility, I think most companies didn't really know what that meant, and I think suddenly they all kind of know what that means by giving them the tools. So what I learned was there was actually something nice that I've been working this hard for my family, for myself, for the mission that I'm on. But what I really needed to do was just balance a little bit in terms of not having to jump on a plane every single week. There was so much that can be done just by focusing and homing in and being in one place for a little bit longer than a week. So I definitely found that enlightening. And also how tough it was at times, because you don't leave the office. So I've always been used to working long hours, but I think during COVID, I've been working like 18, 20-hour days.
I hear you.
You don't have to. I'm leaving the office and I'm going to put my children to sleep. Carry on, and then you're like, oh my God, it's midnight. So I think taking care of yourself, just what you mentioned, Patty, like meditating, just being a bit more self-aware and realizing that it's okay to feel that certain things are tough. It's okay to feel that you're struggling at certain times. And I think this struggle really is what led us into developing MediScreen and innovating in a whole new way. So I'm actually really, really grateful that we were in a very challenged circumstances and we found ourselves having these conversations, and then we realized maybe we're onto something. Maybe we should explore. Maybe we should start looking at things in healthcare, and that really led into this amazing journey. But I think it's okay to feel like things are tough sometimes. You're not supposed to have it all together all the time. And I think few people can relate to that. As founders, we can relate to each other. But I think when you talk to your friends, most of the people who are employed don't really get that part, because your problems are things like funding and invoices, and they're about staying alive, whereas employees' problem was something else, like, oh, I don't go into the office and see my friends anymore, right? It's slightly different. So yeah.
What friends?
Yeah, what friends? Dr. Khanna, what about you? What was your process? Just going through this.
Absolutely. I mean, I can relate so much to what both of you said. First of all, absolutely, as a mom, you immediately realize that it's nice to be at home with the kids, and that it's really important to spend quality time with them, not just be physically present, but mentally present as well. And I think one thing that's really helped, coming back to Fadi, is meditation and doing that on a more regular basis. But so that was just taking care of myself. And then as far as the company is concerned, I think I realized that once you become calmer and have more time, you also slow down in your thinking and become a little more strategic in your thinking. Whereas before, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you're just very frenetically doing everything, especially if you're the chief executive or the co-founder. You're missing the forest for the trees. And I think I'm doing less, but I'm thinking through saying no and saying yes, and we're having a little bit more faith rather than panicking so much. So it's actually been hard, but it's been good. Just like the other guys.
Awesome. So the reason I asked you all this question, just not to get tips like meditation and family time, but I wanted our audience to know you. I wanted to draw your personalities out, right? And so thank you very much and right there you were vulnerable. You talked about family, you talked about self-discovery, right? Now let's get to the meat of the matter, which is, Zohaib, if you can please queue up the polling question, please. For those of you who are joining us, we will be hearing from our panelists, of course, but we also want to hear from you. So now Zohaib is going to pose question number 1, which is, if you're a founder, have you reprioritized your digital roadmap during COVID-19? That's the question, Zohaib. All right. So let me ask you this. There's this whole noise around brick and mortar may not be the same, like brick and mortar business as in not like the shop business, but there is a lot of reprioritization going on, super focused on digital roadmap, right? So if you were not really selling purely via online, all of a sudden it's become big. So much so that the stakes are extremely high in that segment. And I wanted to draw this question because I know I speak to a lot of founders across the globe, and somewhere, somehow, this always comes up. Have you, being founders, first, given a thought to your digital roadmap? Have you reprioritized that at all? Sahinka, do you want to go first, please? We'll just quickly go around and yes, no, why not, why yes?
Yes, I mean, we live and breathe digital. So for us, it's actually a dream that companies that are not looking to change suddenly realize that the way of working is no longer an option. So I think timing is not something that we can force when you're entrepreneurs. The market has to be ready. So for us, I think what we've had to do is probably align a bit more where we knew that our tools really look at 2 things. One is allowing companies to be able to work in a new way, to be able to hire, evaluate people in a new way. That's searching. MediScreen is a tool for the doctors to be able to virtually triage people. So as a digital roadmap, our core is still there, which really is doing things with virtual videos in a new way globally. But I think we're shocked at the speed of some of the conversations that we're having, because before there was not really a big rush, people could take their time and maybe it could take months and months to close a deal. Now we're getting decisions in a matter of weeks for some great things. So I think the speed of the digital transformations are coming in faster. So for us, that's a good thing. We've just got to be able to deliver and hire the right people and get moving on that. So I think as a roadmap, you've just got to plan a bit more ahead from what you're hearing. And really, I think globally, we have to look at where do we build out our teams, because if 90% of our clients happen to be in the UK or the US or in the Middle East, we have to make sure that we facilitate that demand accordingly. So I think that is really to act fast, agile, and plan as much as possible, but also plan for the unplanned. Right? You have to be able to be fast at your execution and deliver. So I think startups generally are good at that. Digital is what we live and breathe.
Awesome. Yeah, Dr. Khanna, what's your view? Have you reprioritized your digital roadmap, and what was your thought process in that?
Well, I mean, we are a company that helps other companies kind of build their digital roadmap and kind of what we call digital 2.0, which is data driven. But we had been thinking and working on a education product. We only have one product, which is remote exam taking, and doing it using artificial intelligence and live proctors so that the test has integrity and no bias. It's a very particular area of education because of our background in education that we had been looking at. And because of COVID, we accelerated that, and one of the largest universities in Pakistan is now using it, and now we're hoping to reach a much wider market, already getting some more traction in ASEAN as well. So I think what it did was it motivated us to realize that a sector like education, which we was lagging behind and we thought we had a long runway, was suddenly very interested, and we had to accelerate our roadmap for that. So in some ways, when you do that, just like what was being said earlier, you have to reprioritize some of your other thinking, and you have to reallocate your resources appropriately. And that takes a little bit of operational and change management. So that has been a bit challenging. On the other hand, it's very exciting to accelerate this and to see this sector that we feel very strongly about actually begin to transform itself. Hopefully for a long time.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the digital transformation sectors in just a minute. But Fari, go ahead. What's your perspective?
So Algify was established, like when I founded Algify, it was supposed to be, and we still are, 100% digital. We want zero touch, really. And I have kind of a weird, eccentric view of saying that the future is mobile. So our solution actually doesn't run on the web. You actually have to have a mobile phone to be able to get the product. That's the only way that you can get the product. We're pushing digital to that level. We're trying to actually change. I don't want to say change consumer behavior, but we are trying to be so responsive to say that everything has to be distilled down to be able to be viewed on the mobile, because this has got to be fully digital end to end. Now, I want to say something here, and this is in full sincerity. Microsoft for Startups was one of the early companies, early tech giants that actually saw what we're trying to do and really believed in Algify, and they've sponsored us. So thank you very much. We're very happy with having to be in the program because that adds a lot of credibility to the vision and what we're trying to do. But I'm going to share something with you that is not related to me changing my roadmap, because my roadmap hasn't changed. Actually, my roadmap's changed slightly to deal with regulators. The challenge that we've had all along has been when you try to do things digital end to end, you actually face things that are outside of your control, where people don't want to go digital. They want to keep the paper trail, and they will push back. And my advice to other founders that might be listening is that don't take it sitting down. You actually have to challenge that fabric of society and come back and say, why? Why do you want me to do this? Why do you want to break this? Why do you want to make it more miserable for the consumer? Why do you want to add a person here? What's the value? And that questioning has made a lot of people uncomfortable. But we actually made a lot of breakthroughs to where we've been able to get people to change their mind. But it's really tiring. It's very tiring because people are set in the way that they operate, in their procedures. And especially in the Middle East, you're trying to bring in something fully digital. in a highly regulated industry like insurance, it's not an easy undertaking. So this is kind of where we are, and we're going to continue to drive for. We're only going to bend for breaking out of 100% digital operation when a regulator will tell us you cannot do that. But we will argue with them for a while first.
So firstly, Tali, thank you for your generous words regarding Microsoft. I have my awesome colleague, Roberto. I don't know if he's online, but
he's the guy is a phenomenal individual. I love the guy.
So anyone in Dubai, which is one of my most favorite cities in the world, you know, just look him up, go say hello to him, take him out for coffee. He's one of the most amazing people I've worked with.
He's an innovator, and you know, when you look at that law of diffusion of innovation, you look at that curve. He's in that 2.5%. He just gets it.
Totally.
He sees something and he gets it. Amazing guy.
It will, you know, he's getting an award now for sure. But thank you all for that. I want to, you know, it's interesting what you all said aligns with the poll results. So once again, the question we asked is, if you're a founder, have you reprioritized your digital roadmap during COVID-19? 67% said yes. 19% said no. Up until 2 minutes ago, I was watching the poll. Still evaluating was 0%. Buddy, when you started speaking, it came up to 13%. Right? And it sort of shows that oftentimes, as you said, don't take it sitting down, right? Challenge the status quo, push back and say, why not? Like what is, you know, what is wrong in what I'm proposing? So that's very interesting. All right.
And if I may add, again, to the founders, don't be, I don't want to sound like this is a poetic thing or whatever, but sometimes you will hear it back from lawyers, and you'll have like 6 suits sitting at a table telling you that something cannot be done. And you go on the board and you say, all right, let's break it down. Tell me where this cannot be done. And I'm happy to say that I've been able to break through with one of the largest outfits, and we even went to the regulator and they said, no, what this guy is saying is correct. And you know, what the lawyers are saying is not necessarily true. And this is where but it you know, it takes energy and it takes passion and somebody that really wants to make a change. So that's about not taking it sitting down, because you got to challenge everything. Not to be pedantic, but you still got to challenge things to make sure your vision comes through.
I think that's what makes us entrepreneurs. That's what makes us innovative.
Absolutely.
We see the vision, we see the way things could be. But I think to add to your point, Fadi, I would also say the world is a big place, right? There are so many countries in the world. So we're in talks with 17 governments, for example. We know that there's like, if you look at how COVID-19 is being managed at the moment, some countries haven't had their first spike. Some of them are trying to mitigate risk for the second spike. Any kind of movement of people really is where our technology can help. Now, it's right not to give up, but I think there comes a point also is that there is someone there who will want your solution. So it's also important to be realistic about some of the conversations that you're having, because for everyone that you might be spending an extra month trying to convince, there's another 10 waiting that could open the door for you. And I think also thank you to Microsoft, because that seal of approval, that kind of help, validation, and everything, the support that they're giving to startups really does give us credibility, because otherwise we're just another company that's trying to do something. But the fact that they've spotted us and supporting us in our journey, like Paddy said, really gives huge weight to what we're doing as well. So thank you for innovation to the corporate.
No, absolutely. You know, at Microsoft for Startups, we love supporting founders like yourself. I mean, that's what drives us every day. That's what drives me, Roberto, our colleagues every single day, is, you know, we have a principle called Founders First. And that's how we operate. Like, what is it that we can do to help founders be successful? So thank you for saying that. I know we have 30 minutes. We have so many questions. So, Zohaib, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip question number 2, and I'm going to open the conversation on digital transformation. This is one of my most favorite topics. You know, going back in time, 10 years ago, when the industry, you know, when there was a .com bubble, you know, there was fin services that completely blew everyone's mind. We saw the stock market going down. Then the industry, the economy started recovering in phases across the world. One of the things that COVID has taught us that if there is one constant in life, that is change, right? I mean, that's what is always there. So to break open the conversation here, Zohaib, can you post the question? I'll read it out to you. I think I had a third question, which is which industries in your view will emerge as strong leaders post COVID-19? That would be amazing if you could post that for polling. Thank you, Zohaib. So I want to break open this conversation around digital transformation. Right before COVID hit us, two industries, in my view, and we can have hour-long conversation on this topic, but aeronautics, like aeronautical space, and then hospitality, were booming, right? During COVID, obviously, there's a huge decline. Sari, I want to start with you. You have had many years of management consulting background, right? You have seen failure and success up close in a very different spectrum. Not maybe perhaps as an entrepreneur in your head, right? Because at that time you were building the practice. What do you use digital transformation in uncertain times?
You mean for these two industries, right?
Yeah, or just general digital transformation overall.
Yeah. So I think that for any industry that is getting hit hard with the pandemic as a result of lack of customers, lack of footfall, there's going to have to be a going back to the drawing board and looking at fundamental ways to reinvent the business. I know that's a bit of an overused word. Let's just look at the essence of it. They have to realize the way that the pandemic has impacted the world. There's a lot more people that are not willing to partake in at least for the maybe short and medium term in close social distanced interactions. So they're going to have to look at how can they change their business to this zero touch or low touch economy and be able to get their products and services out there to the customer the way that they want. And the reason this digital transformation boom has happened is because there's nothing that is more capable to create delivery with zero touch than one of these things, right? Everyone has phone, have his or her phone with them, and the product has to go digital. The problem comes to with aviation or with hospitality. How do you go digital? Can you suck a hotel into your phone and then make it materialize in somebody's house? That's not really going to be the case. So there has to be a fundamental shift in that business. And I don't really have an answer for some of those industries other than if you go to the drawing board and you realize that you have to change the fundamental way that you make money and the way that you market and the way that you bring the customers to you, it has to be congruent with this line of thinking. The other thing, and I'm not saying anything that people aren't already feeling in their sixth sense, is that we know another a wave of COVID-19 is coming. I have no idea if we're going to get a COVID-20 or a COVID-21. I'm curious. I'm on the fence to see if our life has changed forever. Meaning that this is not going to be. This is going to be the new way that we're going to live our lives, and our kids are going to start working more remotely and learning more. And this is going to be I don't know. I mean, I think the jury is out. But I think companies have to start thinking in that line, and saying that what happens if there's no recovery to the way that it used to be. And we have to deliver everything digitally. Go back to the drawing board and figure out how to reinvent your business.
Yeah. Seika, what's your perspective? I want to get deeper into the industry leaders in your view, but go ahead. What's your perspective on digital transformation and what's happening around the world, around us? Or you can talk about that directly impacts your business as well.
So the industries that you mentioned, hospitality, Dubai really, and the UAE is very reliant on tourism, and people are coming on holiday here. So I think one of the roles which are really important is what type of risks are there when you're traveling. And obviously right now, if you look at hotels and airlines, they are suffering really badly because passengers, when they do start traveling, do want to make sure that their safety is taken seriously. So really it is about putting things in place which really build up customer confidence again. In the UK, at the weekend, the websites crashed because people started booking holidays, right? So I don't buy the fact that people will not be traveling again. They will, but they'll be traveling at risk, right? At risk of their own health. And what I think hotels can do really is start evaluating customers, right, that are coming. Same with airlines, airports. You can install technology which is beyond just a fever checker. This really is about mitigating risk and saying to consumers, listen, we care about your safety, we care about your well-being. That's why all of our staff are going to be pre-screened, all of our customers are going to be pre-screened, but like you said, Paddy, in an easy way, with a phone, with technology, which they can log on really simply, do a 10-minute or a 45-second scan or a video, and this really is assessing their risk for COVID. Now, utilizing this at airports and hotels, the reason why it's important is I stayed at a hotel recently and I looked at the journey that I went through just to see what safety measures were being taken into consideration. Obviously there's hand sanitizers, there's you can see everything's being cleaned, but I think the thing that concerns me is that there needs to be more done. And really there are solutions out there. And it's those companies and brands that deploy that solution that will be the first to get the customers. They are the ones that will start to bring confidence back. And if you look at business travelers, there are people that just need to travel as soon as the flights open up, even if they're not comfortable about it. They do need to start traveling. And they will be the ones that want to get that customer's business, right, and money. So if those flights are putting that in place, I'm pretty confident that we will start to see some kind of movement. And as for the other one that you mentioned, Elon Musk has demonstrated during COVID, he managed to send some people into space, right? So against all odds, people are doing some incredible things. So I think when it comes to technology and inspiring people is that challenging circumstances really are taking us, I think, 10x into the future really fast, and maybe what would have taken 10 years is now going to take 1 to 2 years to get to. It just depends what rate everybody moves at, but I think as a world, if even countries in Africa that we're dealing with, people have to walk 2 hours to go to the doctors at the moment. And if they can do a triage from home, from their mobile phone, suddenly the doctor can evaluate it within minutes. And really the impact that can be made through the use of these type of solutions is phenomenal. So I do think that there are going to be industries that suffer in the short term, but I do hope that they also get creative about what they need to do to put in place to get customers feeling safe again. And I'm one of them, right? I know I'm going to be on a plane, and I want to make sure that I feel safe, that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that I'm okay.
Yeah. So I know we barely have 20 minutes here and we have a lot of questions on chat. I'm just going to read the poll results. So interestingly, I did not hear one industry from each one of you. I'll go down the list. So the question is, which industries in your view will emerge as strong leaders post-COVID-19? The top industry is online education. Paddy, I think you alluded to it a little bit when you said about kids and how schools are going to change. But 43% of the polls came in for online education. 21% came for healthcare. Next is, financial services and supply chain, all the toilet paper craze that's going on in the US. That's 40%. And then industrial manufacturing is 7%. So a lot of industries, I know I heard hospitality, aeronautical engineer, aeronautics from you. But, I think, Sarika, to your point, it's going to take a while before these emerge as strong leaders, right? We are talking about industries that will just breeze through this whole thing and just come out as like stellars. So interesting data points. We have about 5 to 7 minutes here. Dr. Khanna, I want to pose this question to you. What are your big plans post-COVID? Coming out of, COVID, post-COVID, what are your big plans?
I mean, honestly, because there's so much uncertainty around COVID, we are not making any post-COVID assumptions. What we're thinking about really is that this is the new reality and we have to deal with it. We have to be positive as a team. And given that we're in the digital and data space, the main difference is being able to physically go and meet our customers and spend time with them and have our business development, also customer care in person. Otherwise, I think business as usual will not change that much for us. Now, we do have one plan. Again, it was very nice to see people do realize that education is perhaps one of the biggest sectors that's going to change because our product is there. So we intend to build out our product and accelerate it much more beyond Asia, where we are right now, but post-COVID to actually have our business partners in the US and Europe also go forward and speak to the different potential customers. So we continue to look at international expansion, but at the moment are very focused primarily on Asia and the East.
Got it. Tsai, what about you? Your big plans beyond meditation, post-COVID?
No, actually, this is also just a word of advice for entrepreneurs is that, you could look at it in one or two ways. Based on the product that you're, we like to think of ourselves as being very customer centric, and the way that we built the product over the past 6 or 7 months has been putting ourselves in the shoes of the customer and then designing everything around it with our partner. It's a savings and wellness platform. It's called Bliss. But what we found during the COVID crisis is that what's on the top of people's minds is going to be they need protection. God forbid something should happen to them. So we worked with our partner on adding additional cover for life insurance. God forbid something should happen to them, and actually rolled with the punches. And then that became something that's very attractive. So I think entrepreneurs should think in the same format, by back thinking about your customers and saying, all right, what are their fears? What are their needs with COVID, with the pandemic right now, and start catering to their needs. And then post-COVID, I think it's just a never-ending game of understanding customer needs and latent needs and making sure that you're constantly re-evaluating and introducing new features that your customers want. It's just never, that's kind of our plan. But we've been lucky because our product is actually hits on a very sensitive human fear of what happens to my family if something happens to me. And we happen to have a life insurance component built into the product. So that was something that was just, we were lucky with that.
That's good. Saika, what about you? What are your big plans coming out of COVID into post-COVID world?
So yeah, huge plans. Sorry, I think I've lost the camera setting for some reason. So our plans really are to go into healthcare in quite a big way. So what it's really done is really taken the whole place of virtual triage. So we've actually just configured our first virtual cardiac screening. We'll also be going into diabetes and all the other areas. So doctors really are utilizing our tool to assess people remotely because they do think that this is going to last for quite a while. And then also for the workplace, really it's about diversity, making sure that people are continually mobilized within the organization. So we have found a trend where departments are starting to shut down. However, people's competencies are still pretty incredible. So what other ways can they be utilized? And really it's about companies being able to leverage technology and assess people much faster, much fairer. So I do think that the world that we've kind of ended up going into, because of all of the unrest, has actually fitted quite well with the solutions that we're providing. So I'm actually quite excited that
that's awesome.
We're
yeah, that's great. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is there are tons of questions from the audience. Let me just pick the one that perhaps there are questions relating to female founders. I'm sorry, somebody's typing. Can you please mute while typing? Thank you so much. Okay, so here's one question. Dr. Khanna, do you want to take this one? There's going to be a big shift in business adopting tech in their current business models. Given there are millions of options, what roadmap or advice would you give to startups and entrepreneurs on how to implement AI the right way?
Well, I think it really depends on the particular that they are facing. So one of the big mistakes is just adding in AI because it's a cool thing to put in. In fact, a lot of CEOs come to us and they don't need it. To be honest, they're not even addressing or prioritizing the customer and the customer's problems. But if in fact you do discover that you have done the extent you can without AI, now AI can really boost that service up, then I frankly find that with the different cloud providers, including Microsoft, there are so many existing components for facial recognition, for speech recognition, for forecasting, for optimization, that you can reuse those libraries quite easily with your cloud engineers and just one or two data scientists, that's really where you should begin. And of course, once you begin to use that, then to improve it, you can build a much more tailored version as well. But I think the options of using AI are much more user-friendly and are much cheaper and there's less barriers to entry than one would think. So I would encourage everyone to look at cloud providers and their built-in libraries and leverage them and experiment with them. The bigger issue for 9.9 out of 10 companies is not the AI, it's the data. Where are you getting the data? Depending on the firm that you have, you can go to open source data sets or competitions like Kaggle, try to get the data sets from there. You can also simulate data sets. That's a bit harder. You can do sampling, but that's where you want to make sure that your algorithm is based on enough data that it's actually, you can test it then in real world situations. So I would focus on the data acquisition, making sure it doesn't have bias or anything else. And use the existing AI components on a number of these cloud platforms as a start.
Got it. Thank you. Fadi, I have a question for you. I think this is your sweet spot. How is the global innovation and investment ecosystem stakeholders, which comprise of incubators, private equity firms, venture capitalists, etc., looking at digital transformation to further enhance the impact on global, not just local, startups related stakeholders? Did you catch that?
Yeah, I got it. I think that obviously during the due diligence process, during the investor pitches, they're looking at and evaluating your firm, or you're evaluating the startup for its ability to scale globally, for sure, or scale regionally, let's say, because they want to make sure that they're doing their investments in something that is going to is not going to be like a local hit within a particular country or city, but something that can go global. So the challenge always is just how do you, I would say I was struggling with this last night, and I'm sure a lot of founders have the same problem. You have this, you can see it. You have a grand vision of how something is going to happen. And you can clearly see it in front of you, be it you're pitching to your enterprise customers or your consumers or whomever. How do you break that down and simplify it into something that somebody that can understand your vision? Because sometimes it's so, you see it clearly, but it's so big. There's so many moving parts, but in your head, it's clear. But somebody has a little piece here and somebody has a little piece there. So I think that but simplification is always wins. So that needs to be broken down for these VC, for this global ecosystem, to show how you're going to succeed in your local market, and then you're going to expand, and how you're going to do it digitally.
Yeah, good. I think Sahika is having some network issues. So Dr. Khanna, do you want to take another one?
Yes, absolutely.
Any advice for female founders for funding, especially in current COVID situation?
I haven't done any fundraising myself so recently. So I would really say that at the end of the day, but I do have some VC friends. I know that for early stage, they are writing checks still. They're still looking for good opportunities. They're looking for vision. They really want to see, two things in particular. And it goes at the first, what Christina said from 500 Startups. It's that you have the grit and that you're very customer focused. And of course, the third thing that's very important is that the market opportunity is very big. So these things have not changed, whether in COVID or post-COVID, but definitely the grit is not only the founder's grit, it is also the grit and resilience of the product against these shocks. Because now, as you know, our expectation is that pandemics will come every decade or so, if we look at what Bill Gates said. So we need to have products that will not have the kind of liabilities, or will not have the kind of overhead that will suddenly fall through the ground, but is able to be resilient to changing dynamics. And by the way, there are a lot more coming. There's migration, there's demographics, there's climate change, there's food security. All of these are things that I would say keep an eye out and have a plan and talk about that in your fundraising. I think that would make a difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I was talking to a founder here a few weeks ago, and it was an interesting conversation that I was having with him. And he said, I asked him the same question. I said, so what will your world look like in post-COVID world, and what about funding and everything? And he said, I want to be an equalizer. And I said, what does that mean? What does equalizer mean? And he said, I want to look at everything that I haven't looked at in my previous life, like sustainability, climate change, clean water, energy, clean tech in general. People oftentimes not look at it. And I want to immerse that as part of my product and make it so healthy, right? And so it's an interesting one. All right, I know we are about time here. Oh, Sahika, you're back. So I'm going to have one question for you, and then we can definitely do that. So, Sahika, I think this question is specifically for you. How is Mediscreen utilizing AI to find the current pandemic?
Yeah, so we're using it in a very minimal way, because in our other tool we use it quite extensively. Here it's really picking up on the words, and then it's forming a digital report. It's pre-recording the video, so it's freeing up the doctor. But what we have planned to do with Mediscreen really is to delve into the AI part a lot more. So AI technology can spot blindness for people with diabetes, for example. That does require a long, extensive testing period and development time, right? So we were able to pivot and move really fast and launch this tool to service what was required to make an impact for COVID. But the ability to what we want to do in healthcare overall, I think, is where I'm really excited about the impact of AI. But that does require a lot more deeper kind of validation and longer periods of testing.
Great. Awesome. I think we're about time here. I don't know if Christine is on, but I wanted to thank her for such insights. It was amazing. I'm personally a big fan of hers, and I'm a big fan of you all as well. What an amazing panel. Thank you all for taking the time to share your personal journey, your vulnerability, your thought leadership. I really appreciate it. And I once again want to thank UAE Ministry of Economy and Annual Investment Meeting team, who have done a phenomenal job. I know they've been working really hard for months to pull this together. So I appreciate all their hard work and all the effort that they have put in. Most importantly, I appreciate picking up a topic that is so relevant in today's times. Thank you very much. I will pass it over to the MC, who will perhaps wrap it up.
Thank you, Shalu. Thank you, guys, for a wonderful session. And I would like to thank all of you guys for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and perspectives about the impact of COVID on female founders and accelerating technologies during the time of crisis. I would like to thank once again, our multilateral partner, Islamic Corporation, for the development of the private sector for sponsoring today's webinar. And I would also like to thank our audience for joining us and sharing their questions. The link to today's webinar will email. We're also conducting a short survey to get your feedback on today's webinar. The link to the survey will be shared with you via the chat and via email. To register for our next webinar that is scheduled for 6th of July, please visit our website, www.aimcongress.com/webinars. Also follow us on social media channels to keep yourself updated. Thank you once again all, and we look forward to seeing you all on 6th. Thank you very much.